The gavel came down at 11 that morning, September the 14th, 1957, in the gravel lot behind the old Farm Credit Office outside Millhaven, Nebraska. $50. Sold. Wendell Pruett laughed loud enough that two men near the coffee urn turned to look. $50 for a box of dead man's linens, he said, and slapped his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Earl Whitfield did not laugh. He counted out 10 $5 bills, folded the receipt twice, and put it in his shirt pocket. The chest was cedar, 41 inches long, 22 deep, weighing near 80 pounds with a lock still fused shut. The wood had gone the color of a bruise healing, gray-brown with a rust bleed down one corner where a hinge had wept for 20 years. Earl noticed the seam along the lid lining sat a half-inch higher on the left side than the right. Nobody else looked twice. The morning was cold for September, 39 degrees, and the crowd numbered maybe 30, farmers mostly, a few bank men in town suits standing apart from the rest like they didn't want the dust on their shoes. Somewhere behind the building a screen door kept banging in the wind, and nobody went to fix it. Earl Whitfield was 71 years old, 5'9", built narrow through the shoulders the way men get who spent 60 years bent over a workbench instead of plow. His hands were spotted and thick-knuckled, the nails always rimmed dark with linseed oil no matter how hard he scrubbed them. His eyes were pale gray, and he had a habit of turning his head slightly before he spoke, like he was listening for something behind him first. He had been repairing furniture in Millhaven County for 49 years. His father had taught him on a lathe in a barn with no heat, and the old man used to say a piece of furniture holds the shape of whoever built it, long after that person is gone. Earl believed it. He had spent his whole life proving it, one dovetailed joint at a time. The trade had gone thin. Younger people bought furniture from catalogs now, factory pine that came apart in 5 years and got thrown out instead of fixed. Nobody in 3 counties still did what Earl did. He kept doing it anyway, because his hands did not know how to sit still, and because somebody had to. A chair remembers who sat in it. Earl used to tell his grandson, "You just have to know how to ask." Wendell Pruett was 44, over 6 feet, built heavy through the middle in a way his gray suit did not hide. He wore a gold pocket watch he checked too often and drove a new Cadillac Fleetwood the color of wheat coffee. He had handled foreclosures for the Farm Credit Office since 1951, and he was good at his job, which was not the same thing as being liked. $50, Wendell said again loud to the men near him, for a box that's been locked shut since the Coolidge administration. Old man's probably got moth holes and a dead mouse in there. The crowd laughed, not because it was funny, but the way a crowd does when a loud man laughs first. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Earl Whitfield's are exactly who Forgotten Federal Vaults was built for. Earl said nothing. He loaded the chest onto his handcart and did not answer. The Farm Credit building itself had been raised in 1934, brick and limestone trim, meant to look permanent in a way the farms around it never got to be. It processed loans, and when the loans failed, it processed the auctions that followed. By 1957, the office had closed for good, folded into a regional branch 40 miles east, and the building sat with its windows soaked over, waiting on a wrecking crew that kept getting delayed. The chest had belonged to Henry Kowalski, a wheat farmer 2 sections north of town, who lost his land in the spring of 1938 when the bank called his note 3 years running short. Henry had built the chest himself the winter before, cedar cut off his own. Property, meant as a hope chest for his daughter Ruth, then 11 years old. He sealed it the night before the marshal came, and nobody in Millhaven ever saw him open it again. He died in 1951, still renting a room above the feed store, still saying nothing about what was inside. 19 years the chest sat in a Farm Credit storage room, tagged, forgotten, until somebody decided the building needed clearing before the wrecking crew came through. Earl had known Henry Kowalski. Not well, but he remembered the man's hands, calloused the same way Earl's own father's had been, and he remembered thinking, even as a boy, that some men carry a debt nobody can see from the outside. Earl pulled the handcart the 6 blocks home himself, his knee aching the way it always did in cold weather, arthritis he'd had since 1949 and never once complained about out loud. Word had already started moving through town before he even got the chest into his garage. Doris at the feed store told her sister, who told the postmaster, who mentioned it to 3 different customers by noon. By the time Earl set the chest down on his workbench, half of Millhaven knew Wendell Pruett had laughed at a $50 box and Earl Whitfield had bought it anyway. His garage smelled of pine shavings and gun oil, the workbench worn smooth and pale in the middle from decades of hands. Earl turned off the radio. He pulled his stool close, set his reading glasses on his nose, and switched on a single bare bulb hanging over the vise. He looked at the lock along while before he touched it. The first attempt, he tried a slim pick, the same one that had opened 100 trunks before this one. Nothing moved. The mechanism had rusted solid, fused the way old iron does when it sits through enough wet winters. He worked the pick for 20 minutes and got nowhere, and for a moment he sat back and wondered if this was the one that beat him. He had never once in 49 years failed to open something a man handed him. He did not like the feeling of doubting his own hands. He soaked the lock in penetrating oil and let it sit. 40 minutes. He made a pot of coffee he did not drink, just to give his hands something to do while he waited. His neighbor Carl stopped by the open garage door to look. "Bet you it's empty," Carl said. "Bet you Pruett's right, and it's just moth holes." Earl said nothing. The second attempt loosened something. He felt it give a half turn, then stop again, the tumblers grinding like a mouth full of gravel. His shoulders had started to ache from the angle he held them at, and he switched hands twice, flexing the stiffness out of his fingers. The third attempt, he braced the chest against his knee, worked the pick slow, feeling for the exact moment the old iron would let go rather than forcing it. He had learned a long time ago that a lock is not a wall. It is a conversation. At 6:14 that evening, the mechanism gave. The sound was small. Not a crack, not a bang. A soft click, like a knuckle popping, followed by a long, low sigh of air, escaping a space that had not breathed in 19 years. Earl did not reach in. He sat back on his stool and looked at the open seam of the lid first. The way a man looks at a door he has waited a long time to open and is in no hurry to walk through. The air that came off it was cold, cellar cold, and it carried the smell of cedar gone dry and something like old paper left too long in a drawer. He lifted the lid the rest of the way with both hands, slow, his back aching from the bend of it. Inside, the wood was pale as the day it was cut, protected all these years from light and weather both. On top lay a folded quilt, the pattern faded to gray-blue, and beneath that, a stack of folded linens gone yellow at the edges. He set the quilt aside, then the linens. Then, near the bottom, his fingers caught on a seam in the lining that did not lie flat the way the rest of it did. He worked his knife along the stitching, careful, the way he'd open a cushion he meant to save the fabric of. Underneath the muslin lining, sewn flat against the cedar, he found a manila envelope, brittle at the folds, and beneath that, a second layer. Bills, old-style silver certificates, $1,200 face value, banded in a rubber strip that had gone to dust the second he touched it. He counted them twice, the way he always did with anything that mattered. Then he opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter, folded in thirds, the ink gone brown but legible. It was dated the night before the marshal came in 1938, addressed to Ruth. Henry Kowalski had written that he was sorry he could not keep the land for her, that he had saved what he could in secret rather than let the bank take every last thing, and that whatever came of his life after, he wanted her to know the money was hers, and that a man's worth was not the same thing as what the bank said he owed. Earl read it twice. He did not cry. He wiped his hands on his trousers, folded the letter carefully back along its old creases, and sat in the quiet of the garage a long while, listening to nothing but the tick of the bulb cooling and a dog barking somewhere down the block. He thought of his own father then, of the lathe in the coal barn, of a man who had also worked with his hand his whole life and never once complained about the years it cost him. Earl sat like that for near 20 minutes before he stood, turned off the light, and went inside to eat the supper his wife had kept warm for him. He did not touch the money again that night. The next morning, Earl drove the 12 miles to the county seat where Ruth Kowalski now lived, 79 years old, a widow herself, still going by her married name of Ruth Anders. He knocked on her door at 8 in the morning, hat in hand, and told her plainly what he had found. No ceremony, minimum words spoken. Ruth sat down slowly when she read the letter, the way a woman does when her knees no longer trust her all at once. She read it twice, same as Earl had, and folded it the same careful way along the same creases before she looked up at him. "He never told anyone," she said. "No," Earl said. "He didn't." Word reached Earl Pruett by that afternoon, the way word always did in a town that size. He heard it standing in line at the feed store, heard a man behind him say the $50 box had turned up $1,200 and a dead man's letter, and Wendell did not laugh this time. He paid for his feed and left without buying the extra sack he'd come in for. Within 2 years, the regional office let him go, quietly, over matters unrelated to the chest, though half of Millhaven liked to say otherwise. He left the county not long after, and nobody much missed him. Earl went back to his workbench that same afternoon, a rocking chair waiting on him with a broken spindle, and he fixed it before supper same as he would have fixed anything else. He never asked Ruth for a dime of the money, and when she tried to press him on him anyway, he shook his head and said he'd already been paid, meaning the $50, and that was the end of it. He had never been offered a reward in 49 years, and would have been embarrassed by either taking it or being thanked for refusing. The chest itself sits today in the County Historical Building, glass case, small brass plate reading only Kowalski family, 1938. Children passing through on school trips stop and ask what it is, and the docents tell them a shortened version, the parts that fit on an index card. Earl Pruett got his $50 laugh. Earl Whitfield got the quiet after it, and kept it the way he'd kept everything else that mattered to him his whole life. What would you have done, standing in that gravel lot in 1957, watching a loud man laugh at an old wooden box nobody else wanted? Would you have laughed along with him, the way the crowd did? Or would you have looked twice, the way Earl did, at the one seam that didn't sit right?